And we'll get going. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to day 3 of this workshop. It's been a really exciting time. Great to see so many people in person. And yeah, we have a great lineup for today. And we have talks through the morning, and then in the afternoon we have the poster session. So I hope everyone comes on by. It is my absolute privilege today to talk to to introduce my old friend, Professor Frauke Kreuter, who holds the chair of statistics and data science at LMU Munich, and also has a long-term affiliation with the University of Maryland, where she's the co-director of the Social Data Science Center and the Joint Program and Survey Methods. She has many awards and acclaims to her name. I think, but most recently has served as the president of APOR, the Public Opinion Research Association. So I could say a lot more, but I don't want to get under her time. So please, Frauke, take it away.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you for having me. This has been fun, and yesterday at the very end, I felt like everyone was like full with information. It almost felt like everything has been said already, and so this could be true for this morning's talk. But sometimes everyone has to say it, and so I say it in my words. No, I will. Joking aside, I will try to, make pointers back and forth between the things that I'm pointing out here and what we heard yesterday and on Monday, so that we really can have a discussion on, how to move things forward, and that's what I'm trying to do here. To do so, I need to look back a little bit, though. My talk is about modeling decisions and how they shape outcomes. One of the modeling decisions that drastically shapes outcomes always is the modeling of the unemployment rates, which is an activity that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is engaged in. And traditionally, they use survey data to come up with these numbers. And like all survey data, they are missing data, and you need imputation models and make decisions on how to model these. And when everything is like it was last year, then these models perform pretty well. When the world changes, not so well. And that's what we saw last year. The numbers were drastically different than in the past, and led to severe outcome changes, not just in markets, but in actually positions, leading to the removal of the commissioner. Now, it is not that the community of official statistic folks and related agencies has been unaware of the weaknesses of survey data for certain data products that they produce on a regular basis, and the weakness of the missing data, but also the measurement error that comes with it. And so about 15 years ago, there was this big movement that many of you are probably familiar with on the evidence-based policymaking that eventually led to new legislation. The report of the Commission for Evidence-Based Policymaking had a couple of elements in there that I thought work well to structure this talk. They have suggestions on promoting public use of data, on data governance and management, and appropriate data use. And I'll use those to talk us through what I think are some of the problems and some ideas on how we can solve it. The biggest problem, of course, that humans are involved in the whole process. Right? There are decisions, there are weaknesses in what we do, and how we set this up. And I can anticipate that some of these humans will be replaced by AI, or what we these days call AI. And that doesn't likely not necessarily makes it better, although it could, right? And that's part of the discussion. The first piece, on the value of data, very briefly, I want to point, and the promoting its use, I want to point to another document, the Principles and Practices for the Federal Statistical Agencies. It's new, it's been in its 15th version or something of that sort, but the latest version came out last year. And the principles in that document, I think, are quite relevant for what we're trying to do here. And interestingly enough, they have one piece in here, which is the trust among the public and the data subjects for the products that are generated. And from, if you reflect on what we heard Monday and Tuesday, this trust is even more elevated in the prediction contest and intervention that are launched based on prediction processes about myself. We had part of that discussion in the panel yesterday. It's one thing to have a clear and transparent way how an average income or a poverty rate is estimated. It's another thing to do this with a consequence for yourself in a prediction context. So that means you need insights into this process, and that means we need to know or look a bit more at what the analysts do there. A lot of the discussion, maybe not in this community, but in general on this topic, as you all know, is which models to use, how to do this best, how to evaluate them in the fairness context that we dabble in. It's a lot about which matrices and, how do we do this on a group level, individual level, and those topics. But one thing that I feel like is still a little under evaluated or looked at is the decisions that happen on the way that are entirely not guided by any systematic research on it, because every use case is so different, every data set is so different, every decision context is so different. And I'll show you with one example what I mean with all these decisions, but they have to do with selections of the cases, the feature generation process, and the like. So the example I'm using is one that you can, this afternoon, look at in detail with Unai's poster. He's using similar data sets. To do that, it's data from the German administrative labor market records. This is a similar record keeping that you've seen in Matt's talk yesterday from the Netherlands, right? So these are employment spells from everybody in Germany who's ever worked since 1971. The whole country since then. That's a lot of data. We used only a 2% sample of that, and only a 5-year span, resulting in about 700,000 unemployment episodes for 300,000 unique individuals. And what we're trying to predict in this case study is long-term unemployment. So imagine a person comes to a local employment agency. We have about 160 of those in Germany. And the agent in the agency has to make a decision. Is this person likely to be long-term unemployed? Because if so, resources will be given to this person, or certain training programs will be given person, decisions of that type, right? And so this is not a trivial decision in the consequence for the individuals. And since we can't look into the human, let's look into the prediction models. We know we have a lot of features that we can use for this prediction, including socio-demographic information, but also past training programs they might have been in and the like. And then, of course, there are decisions of the type we usually do, which models to use, regression, random forest, you name it. And part of these exercises always have to keep in mind what policies we have when we create these scores. So without going into detail for this case study, what I want to show you is that we, for fun, I would say, initially, right? But out of curiosity, looked at what would be the performance score for these different modeling decisions, especially for two groups that we care about a lot, native or long-term German residents versus non-Germans, if you will, right? And what is interesting here in these box plots, you see with each of the dots in the box plots, one instance of these decision space, right? And the comparisons between these two policies. And what I find striking is the difference between the non-German males compared to the German counterparts, and the non-German females compared to their, and how big the variation is between that and the overall performance, right, in terms of an F1 score. There shouldn't be such a wide range. And if the question is, what does that do to fairness, right, overall, when we have in any space this kind of setup? If you come from psychology, and some of you here are from other disciplines, you have seen this discussion about the decisions in other contexts, p-hacking, Gardner-Forking path, you name it. In psychology, they capture this as a multiverse analysis, with basically the idea, if we could spend the universe of all possible decisions, how would that look like if we map it out? Like, let's say we compute our fairness matrices at the end of all possible decisions. So a typical multiverse analysis would be to identify all plausible decision points, to generate the universe of all decisions that can be made, and then to traverse the universe, sort of learn from all these different decisions, and then look at an examination of your statistic of interest across the multiverse. And then, of course, you can evaluate decision points. If we do this, Jan Simpson, who is, I think, online, hello, Jan, and ready to jump in for any questions that might occur. He, as part of his dissertation that he will defend next week, replicated an analysis from Ling and others to predict public healthcare coverage using ACS data with 9 processing decision points that led to more than 60,000 universes to look at. And on the right-hand side, you see the fairness matrix equalized odd difference going from 0 to 1, which are its bounds, but also that basically this analysis can be super fair or not. You know, like these prediction models are all over the place. And so, you know, it's one thing for us to build these models and have an analyst making these decisions, hopefully usually informed by prior literature or theory. But for me, the interesting question is, like, what happens when we have a bot do this? You know, when we aim for an automated decision maker. Yesterday, we had this interesting discussion about the iteration between the bot and the human until they come to an agreement. But, you know, all of these are TBD, how we organize that kind of learning. What I find also interesting is that, you know, this kind of learning in the interaction between the data model, you know, let's say I have a random forest using just the data for this prediction. How do we evaluate that? Because any benchmark generated on these data would suffer from the same multiverse decision matrix, that it's only one instance of the multiverse, and then I use that as benchmark, and I lose any control over who made the decision and why, and how they affect subsequent analyses. So back to the employment agency example, one possible way to think of an evaluation is, of course, what are we doing better than the human would have done it? And we happen to have data from human deciders, the job agency folks, in their decision on, you know, what they thought should happen, and compared our models using just the data and using the caseworker, which is the first one here on the left, and a reinforcement model where we trained the prediction model on the caseworker's decision. So that's what you see here, these 3 elements. On the y-axis, you see the false positive rates, and we differentiate here again between Germans and non-Germans, the groups we were interested before. We still see big differences in the false positive rates for Germans and non-Germans in the LTU prediction, the long-term unemployment prediction. But the data model actually was making fewer errors or relative differences than the human caseworker or the job center agents were. Yeah.
So does false positive mean that they get the unemployment benefits when they're actually
exactly? So perfect. This is exactly where I'm heading to. That's what it means. So what is interesting here, and that's why it says here the decisions beyond modeling, right? It is possible, our interpretation of these data, and you know, I've seen this graph for 2 weeks now, so more to be digged into, but is that the caseworker, if in doubt, decides in favor of the non-Germans, because then they get some form of support, right? And you could prevent that long-term unemployment phase even more, right? So these job agency employees, I mean, they have this job because they do want to help. This might be their approach to do it, also because the background data might be just, you know, less informative for them, and they don't want to err on the wrong side, right? And so it's interesting then to think of how should this interaction between the robot or an automated decision-making system and the humans be organized, right? Who should learn from whom to which extent? And what would, I think that's the other important element, what would the actual case, the patient, the customer expect to happen with respect to what these decisions are based on? So for the kind of input that we just discussed, that a caseworker can tell us what he or she includes in the decision-making process, what the person receiving the decision would want to be included in the decision-making process. We need environments in which that can happen. You know, we need a setting in which we have more than an analyst, where we have more data, presumably more sensitive data that can be used for these analyses, but we also need sufficient transparency for to be judged cases and the stakeholders. And you know, we have seen efforts to create such environments. The UK was one. About 15 years ago, they said, like, oh, we have all this data, we should use them more and better. And let's put a lot of money, you know, ballpark, you know, 800 million in today's dollar into this. They put all the data into this safe environment, and then, you know, a few years later, they closed it down. No one was using it, it wasn't working, right? And we heard from Matt yesterday how difficult this can be. One thing that he didn't talk about so much, only in the discussion, is he here yet? But no. But anyway, that there are a lot of questions on the records itself. You know, we had this discussion, what does this mean? How did the measurement change over time? These are long time spells. Not every recording happens over time in the same way. So without that context and without having the same people, that people knowledgeable about the data in the environment, you basically can't do anything with these data. They're big, the data sets, but not usable. New Zealand did something very different. They, if you want to read the whole story, we had a special issue in HDSR where they reported how they set this up. But 4 learnings stood out to me that I thought are worth bringing into our discussion here. One was to start with one use case and let it grow, and have around that use case the people who know about the data and their generating processes, the analysts, and presumably a participatory element of those being judged. But also that this network of analysts that is created through the joint activities are jointly responsible for the data quality or any annotation of the data quality that's important for subsequent research done with the data, right? And we have tried something along those lines. About 8 years back, we started with this, where we had a set of training programs with a certain use case. Let's say, folks that work in the criminal justice department at state of Illinois, that was one of our first use cases, and then predicting recidivism rates. But other use cases followed, TANF, SNAP data, what is that called? Like, not recidivism, but like, constant uptake of them or getting of these programs typical prediction problems of interest, right? And, not only did we build, with the help of the Census Bureau, a secure environment in which the agency workers and the analysts can jointly work and annotate the data and have a data documentation and data stewardship around these data flows, but also where these particular projects of interest to the agencies can actually be fully developed and fleshed out. And eventually this, we built this nonprofit called the Coleridge Initiative. It has 35 people working for it right now. If you happen to be on the East Coast in March, feel free to visit one of the 6th installment of the conference there. Over time, we have trained in these programs, collaboratively, more than 1,000 employees from these government agencies that work on the content. These weren't analysts in a data scientist type of sense previously, but they work with them inside the environment at all levels, city, county, state, and across many different agencies. My timescale here ends in 2021, so you can imagine it's even more since then. There's also on the website an archive of the training programs if you're interested in what kind of data found their way in, with what other agencies' data they were linked to, and how that whole thing looked like. on the right here, a snapshot of the class presentations and the kind of research questions being asked. I mentioned it earlier, predicting return to cash assistant, that was the word I was looking for earlier, or identifying, predictors of success for TANF recipients and the like. So, if we zoom out again, in my opinion, for these activities that we discussed Monday and Tuesday and that have been going on here the last decade, to increase the decision-making based out of administrative data, we do need an environment of that type. I would be curious to hear, Matt, your experiences with the Odyssey, if they have these features of the environment that you don't just have the analyst in there, but sufficient context to understand what the data actually means, and especially to have quality signals in it. And I see some shaking hands here. That's what I thought. That's why the future has some work left cut out for us, right? A big part is still sort of proper metadata, proper transparency for the records or other data sources that are linked to them. I was part of this National Academies panel on the transparency of statistical information. There's so much not in place yet that is kind of breathtaking, but it is a step forward. Or maybe the approach is something much more simple that colleagues from Harvard suggested last year in a workshop on this topic, that we simply need data tags. This data set, useful, not useful, something in between. And this pointing already to something that Julia Lane is also propagating, that maybe all these criteria and metadata characteristics that you could flag is too complex. Maybe what really matters is the data being used downstream? And a lot, going forward, can we signal that in some way? So these are approaches to capture quality and trust. And then I want to close out with, an even longer term view into the future. We discussed this yesterday a little bit. I mean, there's no way around that we know these survey data are too expensive and the data are not necessarily fit for purpose, because they weren't designed to do what we're trying to do with them, neither on the outcome variable nor on the features in it. They are designed to administer a program, or they are a fallout of an employment history, but they're not designed for what we are trying to do. And of course, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that, well, maybe we can create the data that we want. Maybe we can use the large language models as like the ultimate latent variable generator, if you will, right? Because there should be inside enough context so that the data we can feed in, whether it's employment spells or enriched with survey data, can create the full picture in a way that we couldn't before, right? And so, one proposition that I do want to make, and I think we have 5 minutes for discussion of this proposition or anything else I said, that we can use these safe environments that I sketched out earlier that really have a rigorous approach to whom they let in, what kind of project, what kind of data, and the like. But then to use data that we collected over the decades, survey data and administrative data alike, to train these LLMs about people, about ongoing developments in the world, and definitely an understanding of time if we look backwards. And this is my input for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We have time for a couple of questions, and then we'll get Jackie set up in just a second. Yes, fine.
So I wanted to ask about the kind of unemployment setting. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting there is that it's like a limited resource that needs to be allocated. So if a positive decision is, we predict that you're going to be unemployed for more than 12 months, and it's a false positive, then you're kind of a higher false positive rate means you're over allocating resources to the non-Germans. And so I wonder if we should be thinking differently on the welfare implications of like actually the disadvantaged group being over-resourced as a result of the higher false positive rate. And the other question I wanted to ask is also kind of how you measure these things in a context in which kind of the decision is a policy intervention that's meant to reduce your unemployment spell. So if it turns out, like, the point in a way, I think, is to reduce your unemployment from 12 months. So if indeed these people are getting employed within that period, how do we distinguish between the policy working versus a false positive?
So I do want to make another plug for Onai's poster this afternoon, because it is related to some of these policy decisions that I think hang together with your question, which is where to put the resources and how to allocate the resources in making even these predictions. But I haven't talked at all about the decision on the policy and the ethical implication on whom do we want to spend the resources on. You know, we have papers on this. There's a whole universe of fairness thinking that could go in this, in particular when you do this comparison between Germans and non-Germans, and funds that get spent on people who have been paying taxes for a long time and not. And I mean, there's a whole can of worms. And I agree with you that too needs to be somewhat transparent in this process when these models are created. And in a way, they also already would need to be made transparent when we look at the caseworkers and their decision. I think one thing I forgot to say when we looked at the caseworker, each of the dots that you see in this plot are the different employment agencies, right? And you know, some are located in very conservative counties and some are very liberals. And I would think that this, you know, in a way, larger variance within each of these groups and models than between, you know, is part of this learned policy difference and policy view on how the money should be allocated. So that's my attempt at an answer.
That's fantastic. Let's take another question while we maybe get Jackie set up.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a quick question. So I really like how you pointed out this multiverse issue, and it seems like there's also a multiverse of discretion, like reasons why caseworkers may have been making the decisions that they did. And in the German unemployment context, I was wondering, would data ever record like caseworkers just like making a note of like, oh, why did they make this decision? Do you think that could ever appear in this administrative data infrastructure?
It actually does.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have, the people are working on it right now. So there are some qualitative notes that people take. They haven't been analyzed so far, right? But now, of course, we are in a position where we can do that, and I think that will be super interesting. I haven't seen any reported. Have you? Or not yet. But so stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay.
Well, let's thank our speaker. Thanks so much. Let's not keep you on a hot mic for the next presentation.
Oh, you have a mic.
Oh, yeah, that's
right.
But let's unplug you so you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just keep making comments if you want to. Just